Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday, Yom Shlishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Yehud in South Carolina, Bilam in Missouri, Guy in Ohio, Joe in the Inland Empire, Shandor in the Bronx, Bella in Florida, Marjorie in Georgia. Paula says, "Sing it, Sal." I got behind. I'm editing the joke book, and oh my gosh, it's so late. I got to get on the air, and then I couldn't make the song come on fast enough of Moshe Storch singing, and so while I was playing with it, I was like, oh my god, it's gonna be silence. So I just started singing. Thank God I got Moshe singing. He's such a better singer than I am. La 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 la. Melissa in Great Neck, Belle in Texas, Paul in the Great Northwest, Sharon in New Jersey, Karen in Northern California, Lucy in Minnesota, Randy in Florida, Ella's with us, Ilanit in Silver Spring. Welcome everybody. Very colorful page today. Colorful in the sense of real life, real world incidents. We pick it up. Our daf is page 7, daf Zion, here in Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 3 in chapter 1, and God willing we'll complete that and open Mishna number 4. It is related that two people were living in a 2-story building. One was living in the upper story and one was living in the lower one. And the lower story began to collapse, its walls sinking into the ground to the point that it was no longer fit for dwelling. So the owner of the lower story said to the owner of the upper story, "Come and let us demolish the whole building and rebuild it together." So the owner of the upper story said to him, "I am living comfortably, and I am under no obligation to rebuild your residence." Now on 7a. So the owner of the lower story said to him, "I will dismantle the structure and rebuild it." The owner of the upper story said, "But then I will have no place to live." But then I will have no place to live while you are renovating. So the owner of the lower story said to him, "I will rent a place for you to live for the duration." The owner of the upper story said to him, "I do not want to bother with moving." The owner of the lower story said to him, "But I cannot live in my apartment in this condition, as the walls have sunk into the ground." And the owner of the upper story said to him, "That's not my problem. Crawl on your stomach to go in and crawl on your stomach to go out. But my apartment is fine. Why should I lose the use of my apartment just because there's a problem with your apartment downstairs?" And Rav Huna said, by law, the owner of the upper story can prevent his downstairs neighbor from rebuilding. And the Gemara comments, and this statement applies only when the beams supporting the second story have not reached lower than 10 handbreadths from the ground. Okay, 10 handbreadths from the ground, 10 tefachim. So that's like waist high on me, right? About 40 inches. Where am I? Have not reached lower than 10 handbreadths from the ground. But if those beams have reached lower than 10 handbreadths from the ground, then the owner of the lower story can say to the owner of the upper story, "Below 10 handbreadths is my domain, and my domain is not bound to you to support your residence." In other words, your sinking residence has crept into my domain, and now I will rebuild the whole house. But until that extreme situation, the poor guy in the lower residence is out of luck. And the Gemara further comments, and this statement that the owner of the upper story can prevent his downstairs neighbor from rebuilding applies only when they did not stipulate with each other that if the house sinks, they will rebuild the house anew. But if they made such a stipulation with each other, then they must dismantle the house and rebuild it. So you can imagine this is like the first time that ruling came down. And thereafter, probably, right, every purchase and sale agreement and lease agreement would include such a stipulation so that the owner of the lower residence doesn't end up, walking around hunched over in an area where houses made of stone do tend to sink into the ground. And the Gemara asks, and if they made such a stipulation with each other, so then to what extent must the ceiling of the lower story drop before they implement the stipulation? And the sages said before Rab in the name of Marzutra, the son of Rav Nachman, who said in the name of Rav Nachman, like that which we learned in a Mishna on page 98b. If one takes upon himself to build a house for another person without stipulating its dimensions, its height must be equal to the sum of half its length and half its width. And Rabbah said to him, did I not tell you not to hang empty pitchers on Rav Nachman? Meaning, do not attribute foolish opinions to the great Rav Nachman. That's not what he said. This is what Rav Nachman said. As people normally live, and no more. So how much space is what people normally live, right? What is the height of a normal house, the interior height of rooms in a regular house where people normally live? How much is that? Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, said the ceiling of the lower story must be high enough so that one could bring in bundles of reeds of the type made in Mechoza and be able to turn around. Meaning you could walk into your house carrying a bundle of reeds on top of your head and you wouldn't hit the ceiling, right? You'd be able to turn around with the reeds. Maybe people were a little shorter then, but you could probably imagine that something like 7 feet, 8 feet, right? Something like that would be the minimum height of the interior of a house. It is further related that a certain man built a wall outside the windows of his neighbor, and the neighbor said to him, you are blocking the light with your wall and darkening my house. And the one who built the wall said to him, okay, I will seal your windows here and make new windows for you in your wall above the wall that I am building. And the neighbor said, well, by doing so, you will damage my wall. So the one who built the new wall said to him, I will demolish your wall until the level of the windows and rebuild it. And then I will make windows for you in the new part of the building above my wall, so you will have light and a newly constructed wall above that height with windows in it. But the neighbor said to him, a wall that is old at the bottom and new at the top will not endure. So the one who built the new wall said to him, I will demolish the wall until the ground, and I will entirely rebuild that wall. And then I will make windows in it for you that are above my new wall. And the neighbor said to him, one new wall in an old house will not endure. So the one who built the new wall said to him, I will demolish your entire house and put windows in the new building that I will erect in its place. And the neighbor said to him, but in the meantime I will have no place to live. So the one who built the wall said to him, I will rent a place for you to live. And the neighbor said to him, I do not want to bother with moving. And Rav Chama said, by law, this neighbor can prevent him from building the wall. Right? You can't build a wall that's going to block somebody else's windows and leave the interior of his house dark. And then, even though you're willing to rebuild his whole house for him, you can't force him to move out of his house and have his house rebuilt just so that you can do your construction project on your side of the property line. You just can't. And the Gemara asks, Well, this case of the new wall beside the window is identical to that previous case of the sinking lower story where the ceiling's getting lower and lower, where the one, who has the problem is willing to rebuild everything for the other one, but the one who would be inconvenienced just doesn't want to be inconvenienced. So why do we need this new second additional case? And the Gemara answers, this teaches us that even if the neighbor uses the house only for storing straw and wood, he can still maintain that blocking the light causes him damage, and he can prevent the neighbor from erecting the wall. And now, before we get into the next case of two brothers who divided their father's estate, I will say that when you look up the halacha on the cases that we just read, there is a limit. Right? There is a limit. It's true, because you want to have a project on your side of the property line, you can't inconvenience your neighbor on his side if that's going to mean, making him move or blocking his light, etc. There are strong limitations on what you can do that would cause damage to your neighbor and that would inconvenience him while you're trying to craft a solution so that you could do your project and deal with the problem of the damage that would be caused to him. But because you would inconvenience him, force him to move out, you probably can't do it. But there's a limit, right? Because if the neighbor is not even living there, or if he can't articulate a reason why this is a big inconvenience to him, like if it's a storage shed that he's barely using, and he's gonna, just because he doesn't want to be bothered to deal with it, he doesn't want to, have this problem that's gonna cause now his neighbor the problems that he's not able to develop his property. So at a certain point, the court will step in and say, you're acting like the residents of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Who one of the behaviors of Sodom and Gomorrah was that, well, what's yours is yours and what's mine is mine, and I don't have to help you and I don't have to deal with you, and leave me alone, right? And no cooperation between neighbors. So if somebody is just being so difficult where it would cause him so little inconvenience and it would be such a big benefit to the neighbor, at a certain point, the community will really look down on that person. They might even step in and intervene. Having said that, for the most part, you can't force your neighbor to be inconvenienced so that you can build on, so that you can have a building project. Okay, the Gemara further relates. There were two brothers who divided their father's estate between them. So one of the brothers received a hall in his share, and one received a garden, right? So a hall, a building, that's probably more valuable than a garden. Now, the one who received the garden went and built a wall in front of the opening of the hall. And his brother said to him, you are blocking the light with your wall and darkening my house. And the one who received the garden said to him, I am building on my property. And Rav Chama said, by right, he said that to him as it is permitted for him to build there. Ravina said to Rav Ashi, in what way is this different from that which was taught in the Baraisa, that the two brothers divided their father's estate between them, one of them taking a vineyard and the other one taking a grain field? The owner of the vineyard has the right to take an area of 4 cubits wide away from the grain field for the purpose of working the vineyard, since it was on that condition that they divided the estate. So why in this case does the owner of the hall not have the right to make use of the light coming in from the garden? And Rav Ashi said to him, the reason is that they made an assessment with each other between the vineyard and the grain field, arranging for compensation if one received more than the other. If the vineyard was, more acreage than the grain field or vice versa, they kind of adjusted the border until it would be some kind of 50-50 even split value-wise between the vineyard and the grain field, right? They made that assessment when they divided the estate. So then the Gemara asks, but what did they do here in the case of the garden and the hall? Did they not make an assessment with each other? Are we dealing with fools? That this one took the valuable hall and the other one took the much less valuable garden without making an assessment with each other? So Rav Ashi said to him, although they assessed with each other the value of the bricks, the beams, and the boards, they did not assess with each other the value of the airspace. And with regard to that, each one retained full rights to his respective airspace. So the Gemara says, and let the one who received the hall say to the other, initially you gave me a well-lit hall, and now you are making it into a small dark room. So Rav Shimi Bar Ashi said he gave him only a place that is called a hall by name, that is a place that is called a hall, even though it is no longer used that way, right? So I think hall, we're not talking about a hallway, we're talking about, a fairly magnificent house, right? The kind that you would give a name to and call it, Litvak Hall or something like that. Now Rav Ashi continues, well, isn't it taught in a Baraisa? In the case of one who says to another, I am selling you a base core of dirt. So this sale is finalized even if it turns out to only be a letach, which is a half core. And the sale is not voided because he sold him only a place that is called a base core by name, right? In other words, if I say to you, this is, we've been living here for many years, and, we have the house, we have the garden, we have the shed, we have the soccer field, I don't really need the soccer field anymore, so I'll sell you the soccer field. Now, is it the size of a regulation soccer field? No, it just means that when we were kids, we played soccer there, and we called it the soccer field. So when this guy buys it, and it turns out, that it is not nearly the size of a regulation soccer field, can he say to me, you know what, I want my money back because that soccer field that you sold me is not the size of a real soccer field? And I would say, I sold you what we around here all refer to as the soccer field. It's called the soccer field. That's what I sold you. That's what I was referring to. So what they're saying here is, just because this place has a name, that in some contexts has some kind of a measurement associated with it, doesn't mean that in this context we would require that full measurement. And the Gemara comments, and this ruling applies only as long as the land he is selling him is actually called a base core, right? It's actually called a soccer field. I didn't just make that up for the purpose of selling you that field outside. Then it might be, fake advertising, misleading claim about the land I'm selling you. But if we, the people who live around here, all refer to it as the soccer field, and that's why I referred to it, and there was no lie intended. And similarly, if he says to him, I am selling you an orchard, the sale goes through even if this orchard lacks pomegranates, because he sold him only a place that is referred to as an orchard by the locals in the same way. And the Gemara comments, and this applies only as long as the land that he is selling is actually called an orchard by the people who use it and live around it. And similarly, if he says to him, I'm selling you a vineyard, the sale goes through, and it belongs to now belongs to the purchaser, even if the so-called vineyard lacks grapevines, because he sold him only a place that is called by that name by the people who live there. And the Gemara comments, and this applies only as long as the land that he is selling is actually called a vineyard by the people who use it. And the Gemara rejects this whole argument. Are these cases comparable? There, the seller can say to the buyer, I sold you only a place that is called by that name. But here with the brothers, and one got a hall and one got a garden, the one who received the hall can say to his brother, I took this portion as my share on condition that I would live there the way our fathers lived there. And that you would not change that by blocking the light entering through the windows. It's a pretty good argument. So with regard to Rav Chama's ruling that it is permitted for the brother who received the garden to build a wall in front of the doorway of the hall, they said to him, i.e. Mar Yanuka and Mar Kashisha, the sons of Rav Chisda, said to Rav Ashi, the sages of Nehardea follow their usual line of reasoning, as Rav Chama, who was from Nehardea, issued his ruling in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel, who was also from that city. And Rav Nachman says that Shmuel says, in the case of brothers who divided their father's estate, they do not have a right of way against each other. Although the father would traverse the outer field from the inner field to access the public domain, the brother who received the inner field as an inheritance does not have the right to traverse his brother's outer field, because now it's two parcels of land that are not owned by the same person. So even though their father used it that way, now that it's been split into separate parcels, they're separate parcels and they don't come automatically with an easement. They might have negotiated with each other and assessed the property and said the inner field is going to need an easement for somebody to get to it and pass through the outer field. But they would have had to negotiate for that at the time that they were splitting the estate. Now on page 7b. Shmuel continues, and nor do these brothers have the right of windows against each other, i.e. the right to prevent the other from building a wall facing his windows. Nor do they have the right of ladders against each other, i.e. the right to set up a ladder in each other's property in order to get to their own. And nor do they have the right of a water channel against each other, i.e. the right to pass a water channel through the other's property. And be careful with these, since they are established halachos, established laws. And Rava says the brothers do have all those aforementioned rights. And Rav Chama agrees with Shmuel's position that each brother can do as he pleases on his own property without the other one preventing him from doing so. Now, since Rav Chama's rulings were mentioned, the Gemara cites another halachic ruling in his name. There was a certain promissory note inherited by orphans from their father. Right, so the father was owed money by some third party. The father died, and so this promissory note, which is evidence of a debt that was owed to the father, is now inherited by the sons, right, who are the orphans of that father. And now they went to collect, right, their father's promissory note. They saw the name of the borrower on the promissory note, and they went to the borrower and they said, okay, pay us the money that you owed our father. We have inherited the promissory note. And what did the borrower do? He presented a receipt stating that the debt had already been paid. So Rav Chama said, we cannot use the note to collect the debt on behalf of the orphans, but neither do we tear it up. And the Gemara explains, we cannot collect with the note because a receipt against it was produced by the borrower. And we cannot tear the note up because perhaps when the orphans grow up, they will be able to find and bring proof that the receipt was forged. And they will be able to reverse, they will undermine the receipt, and then they can collect, and probably they will collect more than what the promissory note asked for, since they would have then revealed that there was fraud. Now Rav Acha, the son of Rava, said to Ravina, what is the law? And Ravina said to him, in all these cases in this discussion, the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Chama, except for the case of the receipt, because we do not presume that the witnesses are liars. Since witnesses signed the receipt, the court trusts that the debt was paid, and they do tear up the promissory note. Mar Zutra, the son of Rab Mari, said, in this case as well, the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Chama, because the validity of the receipt is in doubt. As if it is so that it is a valid receipt, the borrower should have produced it during their father's lifetime. And since he did not produce it at the proper time, we learn from this that he may have forged it. Even though this is not an absolute proof, it is sufficient reason not to tear up the promissory note. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 1. Now, Mishnah number 4. The residents of a courtyard can compel each inhabitant of that courtyard to financially participate in the building of a gatehouse and a door to the jointly owned courtyard. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees and says not all courtyards require a gatehouse, and each courtyard must be considered on its own in accordance with its specific needs. And similarly, the residents of a city can compel each inhabitant of that city to contribute to the building of a wall, double doors, and a crossbar for the city. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees and says not all towns require a wall. And with regard to this latter obligation, the Mishnah asks, how long must one live in the city to be considered like one of the people of the city and therefore obligated to contribute to these expenses? 12 months. But if he bought himself a residence in the city, he is immediately considered like one of the people of the city, right? So the gatehouse for the courtyard, I mean, imagine, people live in an area and their crime has gone up and they want to install some security measures. So there's going to be a wall around the courtyard and a gatehouse, presumably with a watchman who's going to control who comes in and out of the courtyard, who comes in and out of the building. Or the same thing for a town or a city. They're going to build a wall around it, have a gatehouse, double doors, for a walled city. And then they're going to have an assessment, all the people in the city, a tax to pay for the security measures. Who could imagine such a thing? And you can say, a bunch of people will say, hey, we're poor, we're retired, we don't have money. We don't think that this is necessary. We've lived here all our lives. We haven't had trouble. Why do you need a gatehouse now? And the other people will say, well, we absolutely need it. Crime is rising. Such a real world type of issue. And that's the Mishnah. Gemara. The Gemara asks, is this to say that making a gatehouse is beneficial? But wasn't there the story of that pious man with whom the prophet Elijah was accustomed to speak? And he built a gatehouse, and afterward Elijah did not speak with him again. So the objection to the building of a gatehouse is that the guard who mans it prevents the poor from entering and asking for charity. And the Gemara answers, La Kasha, this is not difficult. The case presented in the Mishnah is referring to a gatehouse built on the inside of the courtyard, in which case the poor can at least reach the courtyard's entrance and be heard inside the courtyard. And that, the story of the pious man and Elijah, that involved a gatehouse that was built on the outside of the courtyard, which completely blocked the poor people's access to the courtyard's entrance. And if you wish, say instead that in both cases the gatehouse was built inside the courtyard, and yet this is still not difficult. In one case there is a door to the gatehouse so that the poor cannot be heard inside the courtyard, while in the other case there is no door. Or if you wish, say that in both cases there is a door and still it is not difficult. In one case there is a key needed to open the door and the key is not available to the poor people, whereas in the other case there is no key needed. Or if you wish, say that in both cases there is a key needed, and even so this is not difficult. In the one case the key is on the inside so that the poor cannot reach it, while in the other case of the Mishnah the key is the key is on the outside, right? So bottom line, we're balancing the needs of the community, safety and security, versus being welcoming and accommodating to the poor who are seeking charity. And the Mishnah teaches that the residents of a courtyard can compel each inhabitant of that courtyard to financially participate in the building of a gatehouse and a door to the jointly owned courtyard. And it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, not all courtyards require a gatehouse. Rather, a courtyard that adjoins the public domain requires a gatehouse to prevent people from peering in. But a courtyard that does not adjoin the public domain does not require a gatehouse. And the Gemara asks, and why don't the rabbis make this distinction? And the Gemara answers, even if a courtyard does not adjoin the public domain, people in the public domain sometimes are forced toward the courtyard due to crowding in the public domain, and they come and they enter the courtyard. The Mishnah teaches that the residents of a city can compel each inhabitant of that city to contribute to the building of a wall, double doors, and a crossbar for the city. And the sages taught in a Baraisa, the residents of a city can compel each inhabitant of that city to build double doors and a crossbar for the city. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, not all cities require a wall. Rather, a city that adjoins the state border requires a wall, whereas a city that does not adjoin the state border does not require a wall. So if your compound is near the border, where there might be an enemy of the state, neighboring country, not amicable to your people, so that community needs more security than a community that's more inland from the border. Perhaps you could think of a case in real life like that. The Gemara asks, and why don't the rabbis make this distinction? And the Gemara answers, even if a city does not adjoin the border, it sometimes happens that invading troops come into the area. Therefore, it is always good for a city to be protected by a wall. With regard to this issue, Rabbi Elazar asked Rabbi Yochanan, when the residents of the city collect money to build a wall, do they collect based on the number of people living in each house? Or perhaps they collect based on the net worth of each person? How are we going to make this communal assessment for the security measures that we all need? Does everybody pay the same? Or do the rich people pay more? Rabbi Yochanan said to him, they collect based on the net worth of each person. And Elazar, my son, you shall fix nails in this, i.e., this is the established halacha, and you must not veer from it. The rich have more to protect. The rich have more to offer. The rich get charged more when they're doing security. Now, there are those who say that Rabbi Elazar asked Rabbi Yochanan, when they collect money to build a wall, do they collect based on the proximity of the houses to the wall, so that those people who live closer to the wall pay more? Or perhaps they collect based on the net worth of each person. And Rabbi Yochanan said to him, they collect based on the proximity of their houses to the wall. And Elazar, my son, you shall fix nails in this. Sounds like a contradiction to what we just heard a moment ago. It is related that Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya once imposed payment of the tax for the wall even on the sages. And Reish Lakish said to him, the sages do not require protection. As it is written, how precious are your dear ones to me, O God. If I should count them, they are more in number than the sand. Psalm 139. If I should count whom? If we say this is referring to the righteous, and the verse is saying that they are greater in number than the grains of sand, this is difficult. Now, if it is written about all of Israel, as the sand which is upon the seashore, which we find in Genesis 22:17, can the righteous themselves, who are part of Israel, be greater in number than the grains of sand? How can they possibly outnumber the grains of sand upon the seashore? The metaphor used when God told Abraham that your descendants will become a great nation, and it'll be impossible to number them. There'll be so many. So rather, this is what the verse is saying. If I should count the deeds of the righteous, they are greater in number than the grains of sand. And it follows by a kal v'chomer inference, if the grains of sand, which are fewer in number, protect the shore from the sea, barring it from flowing inland, see Jeremiah 5:22, do not all the more so the deeds of the righteous, which are greater in number, protect them? And consequently, the sages do not need additional protection. And when Reish Lakish came before Rabbi Yochanan, reported the exchange to him, Rabbi Yochanan said to him, what is the reason that you did not quote this verse to him? I am a wall, and my breasts are like towers, from Song of Songs 8:10, which may be explained like this. I am a wall, this is referring to the Torah, and my breasts are like towers, these are Torah scholars. And towers do not require additional protection. And the Gemara comments in Reish Lakish, who did not cite this verse, holds in accordance with the way that Rav expounded the verse, I am a wall, this is referring to the congregation of Israel, and my breasts are like towers, these are the synagogues and study halls. You know where this comes up, this discussion, very much in the news in Israel these days, is, are the Torah scholars, are the yeshiva students, are the people who are learning full-time, well into their 20s, maybe even 30s, 40s, 50s, are they going to serve in the IDF, right? So one view is, we're at war, we really need everybody, everybody's got to serve. And by the way, there are a lot of Haredim, right, religious people, full-on Hasidim with the payas, very religious Litvish people from the yeshivas who are joining the IDF and participating in the effort. But there are others who are standing their post in the war by ensuring that there's, a core group of people completely dedicated all day long, every day to learning Torah. And that also, as we're learning here, is part of the protection of the Jewish people. So different people stand their post in different ways. I'm not weighing in on the controversy. I'm just telling you how that controversy is very relevant to what we're reading right here. And it is similarly, we're on page 8a now. This was a quick daf, so we're going to get a little head start on tomorrow. It is similarly related that Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda once imposed payment of the poll tax even on the sages. And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said to him, you have transgressed the words of the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. So you have transgressed the words of the Torah, as it is written, even when he loves the peoples, all his holy ones are in your hand. Deuteronomy 33:3. And this is understood to mean that Moses said to the Holy One, blessed be he, Master of the universe, even when you hold the other nations dear and grant them dominion over Israel, let all his holy ones, meaning the Torah scholars, be exclusively in your hand and free from the authority of the nations, and therefore be exempt from paying taxes to foreign governments. And the continuation of that verse can also be understood as referring to Torah scholars, as it states, and they sit, tuku, at your feet, receiving your words. And Rav Yosef teaches these are Torah scholars who pound mechatetem, their feet from city to city and from country to country to study Torah, receiving yisa, your words, to discuss lisavelitin, the utterances of God. It's not like these Torah scholars are having it easy, living in the lap of luxury where other people are fighting and paying taxes. They are busting their butts, learning 15, 16, 17, 18 hours a day. I mean, their life is not easy, often living in crushing poverty, but they're totally dedicated to learning and teaching Torah. And this is of the value, tremendous value to the nation. And you have transgressed the words of the prophets, as it is written, though you have hired lovers, yitnu, among the nations, now I will gather them, and they will begin to be diminished by reason of the burden of kings and princes, from Hosea 8:10. And with regard to this verse, Ula says part of this verse is stated in the Aramaic language. The word yitnu should be understood here in its Aramaic sense, to learn. And the verse should be interpreted as follows: if all Israel learns Torah, I will gather them already now. And if only a few of them learn Torah, they will be excused from the burden imposed by kings and princes. And this indicates that those who study Torah should not be subject to paying taxes. But let's just back up a step. If all the Jews would be learning Torah, I would gather them up right now. Meaning, Mashiach would come, all the Jews would be gathered into the Holy Land, the Messianic age would begin, but bing! If only we could get all the Jews in the world to learn Torah with us. I don't know how long they have to be learning Torah for, but maybe for 1 minute. If all the Jews in the world were learning Torah together for 1 minute, maybe that would be it. And furthermore, he said, you have transgressed the words of the writings. As it is written, it shall not be lawful to impose tribute, impost, or toll upon them, from Ezra 7:24, i.e. upon the priests and the Levites who serve in the temple. And this law would apply to Torah scholars as well. And Rav Yehuda says tribute, this is referring to the king's portion, a tax given to the king. Impost, this is referring to the head tax. Toll, this is referring to a tax, arnona, paid with property that was imposed from time to time. Guess we'll stop there. Sorry, I didn't give you warning. I actually went further than I expected to because we moved so fast. So I really should stop since I haven't prepared what I've been reading for the last few paragraphs. Okay, let's take some comments and questions as I reload the Google Doc to receive the questions that Nina is sending my way after harvesting them in the comments. Bill, heights in ancient times are an interesting thing. Height seems to have operated on something like a tide based on armor we found. For example, the Romans were more or less our height at the height of their empire. But by the beginning of late antiquity, early medieval age, circa the Talmud, heights were starting to drop and starting to rise again in the Renaissance era. I assume you're talking about like people's average height, like the height of humans. And the most likely explanation is better diets from greater prosperity, but it's still slightly shaky. The highly prosperous Tang Empire in China around the same time followed the same pattern of average heights decreasing. So interesting, like what would cause it? Is it, if the diet is fairly stable, then it's not being caused by that. Who knows? Maybe there's maybe there's just a drift that kind of goes up and down. It's somewhat cyclical, but moves. I'm just speculating, And maybe, people's tastes change, just like fashions change. maybe what's considered attractive in one era is different than what's considered attractive in another, and maybe height, the desirability of height in a mate, whether it's desirable or not, changes over time. I have no idea. I'm just thinking out loud. Says Bill, so in essence, this law is there so that if you buy a house in Martha's Vineyard, you cannot then complain that there aren't grapes growing in your new yard when you arrive. With respect to, if the name is a vineyard, that doesn't mean that you had the right to believe that what you were purchasing would come with grapevines, and otherwise you can demand your money back because it's called a vineyard like Martha's Vineyard. Bell, I was going to point out that every new development, that all these new developments have airy names, such as Thousand Oaks or Whispering Pines. No one should expect those oaks or pines in the environs. Exactly, just so. And Bell also says, in the present time of aggressive acts toward Jews, I am feeling the echoes of the World War I song, Praise the Lord and Pass the Ammunition. Well, where I stand on the need for Jews to arm themselves. We may not like guns. We don't like how loud they are. We don't like that they're expensive. We don't like that they require all kinds of training and expense, etc. And especially the safety training. But never again means we have to be accountable and take responsibility for protecting our communities. Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Wednesday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night. And by the way, as of now, I am planning to be teaching on the 4th of July. Why wouldn't we? Right? Why wouldn't we?